The man removed the gag from the girl's mouth. Then he forced her to drink a large amount of water. When she eventually needed to use the bathroom, he handed her a white chamber pot, embarrassed and unwilling to lower her pants. The girl hesitated. The man pretended to leave. In reality, he merely stepped back a few feet and quietly watched her every move. He even ordered the girl to address him as master. Whenever he shouted the command attention, she was required to rush to the wall immediately and obey his instructions without hesitation. Just 1 week earlier, Sally had done nothing more than accept a ride from a passing car. She never imagined that such a small decision would nearly cost her life. She had been hurrying to attend a reunion with old classmates on the isolated road where she was traveling. Cars rarely passed by, so when she finally spotted a vehicle and saw that it was occupied by a young married couple, she climbed in without a second thought. What Sally didn't know was that the seemingly ordinary couple were actually monsters. Countless young women had already fallen victim to them. In order to gain Sally's trust, Janice played the role of a warm and friendly wife. She chatted casually with Sally throughout the drive. According to Janice, she and her husband Jack had always enjoyed a happy marriage. She explained that they were simply taking a scenic drive to enjoy the beautiful countryside. Moments later, Jack pressed harder on the accelerator and sped deeper into the forest. The surroundings grew increasingly isolated. Before Sally fully realized what was happening, the vehicle suddenly came to a stop. The couple stepped out of the car and instructed Sally to come with them. She looked around but couldn't see a single house anywhere nearby. He clamped a hand over Sally's mouth and pressed a knife against her neck. He warned her not to make a sound, otherwise, he would kill her on the spot. To prevent any chance of escape, he locked her head inside a small wooden box. Then he covered the rest of her body with a blanket. Once everything was secured, Jack shouted for Janice to get in the car. Then he slammed on the gas and drove toward an unknown destination. After what felt like an eternity, the vehicle finally stopped in front of an abandoned industrial building. Jack dragged Sally out of the car. She was terrified. She had no idea what they intended to do with her. All she could do was follow as Jack pulled her farther inside. The uncertainty was suffocating. Soon, Jack forced Sally to stand on top of a metal container. It appeared he intended to suspend her there. Then Jack called Janice over. He forced her to watch what was happening. Again and again, he subjected Sally to physical abuse. Each blow drew cries of pain from the terrified young woman. Rather than feeling remorse, Jack seemed to take satisfaction from it. That night, he locked Sally's head inside the wooden box once again. Sally couldn't understand why her life had turned into such a nightmare. She screamed and pleaded. Jack remained completely unmoved. Carefully, Janice asked her husband to release the girl, but Jack refused. If Sally were set free, he insisted, she would immediately go to the police, and then everything would be over. Hearing this, Janice stopped arguing. Still, she wasn't entirely without limits. There were certain lines she didn't want crossed. When Jack noticed tears in his wife's eyes, he reluctantly backed down for the moment. The following day, after Jack left the house, Sally's cries continued echoing from the basement. Janice covered her ears, desperately trying not to listen. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. Carrying a shotgun, she walked downstairs. She opened the box surrounding Sally's head. Sally immediately begged to go home. She promised she would never contact the police. Janice hesitated. For a brief moment, she considered letting her go. Then she thought she heard her husband's footsteps outside. Instantly, she abandoned the idea. The risk felt too great. If Sally reported them, Janice feared she would be implicated as well. Unable to endure the cries any longer, Janice eventually put on headphones, trying to drown out the sound. When Jack returned home, he rushed straight to the basement. He had built a special wooden box specifically for Sally. It allowed him to keep her confined for extended periods of time, to ensure she could survive inside. He even installed ventilation holes. Whenever he left the house, Sally remained trapped within the cramped enclosure. The endless darkness and silence only deepened her fear. She pounded desperately against the wooden boards above her head. She longed to escape the endless prison. In moments of exhaustion, she imagined black birds circling overhead. To her, they represented freedom, yet freedom remained painfully out of reach. 2 weeks later, Sally's family received alarming news from her landlord. Her lease had expired, but she had never renewed it. It was as if she had vanished without a trace. Terrified for their daughter's safety, her parents immediately went to the police, but because Sally was legally an adult, the authorities showed little urgency unless concrete evidence emerged. They explained there was only so much they were willing to do. As time passed, 6 months slipped by in the blink of an eye. One day, Janice excitedly rushed to Jack's workplace with wonderful news. She told him that she was pregnant. At the same time, she reminded him of the promise he had made about eventually releasing Sally, but Jack immediately found an excuse. He argued that now that Janice was expecting a child, releasing Sally would be far too dangerous. If Sally went to the police, he would end up in prison and be unable to care for either Janice or their unborn baby. After listening to her husband's reasoning, Janice once again chose to follow his wishes, and so, Sally remained imprisoned for a staggering 230 days. Then one day, while flipping through a book, Jack suddenly came up with what he believed was the perfect plan. He handed Sally a document. The contents were terrifying. Jack claimed that he belonged to an international criminal organization. According to him, keeping Sally captive had been an order from the company's leadership. He warned her that if she ever tried to escape, the organization would send people after her family. Terrified, Sally quickly promised that she would never run away. Jack then claimed that he had spent a large amount of money on her. After that, he announced that she would now become a servant in the household. He forced Sally to sign a contract declaring herself a servant. Faced with this sudden and overwhelming situation, she could do nothing but accept it through tears. The next day, Jack finally brought her out of the dark basement, but before doing so, he fastened a cold dog collar around her neck. He ordered her to address him as master. Sally felt humiliated and helpless, yet in this unfamiliar and hopeless place, she had no choice but to endure everything in silence. Seeing how obedient she had become, Jack couldn't hide his satisfaction. A smile spread across his face. Soon afterward, he began putting Sally through a series of strict drills. Whenever he shouted the command attention, Sally was required to run immediately to the wall, remove her clothing as quickly as possible, and raise both hands toward the ceiling. Unfortunately, the scene was witnessed by Janice, who had just returned home. A powerful wave of jealousy instantly surged through her. Jack hurried to explain that he was merely training Sally, but Janice remained deeply unhappy. She didn't dare confront her husband directly. Instead, she directed her anger towards Sally. In her eyes, it was Sally who was deliberately trying to attract Jack's attention.
Clean that up.
That evening, Janice intentionally caused trouble at the dinner table. She falsely accused Sally of failing to prepare utensils for her meal. The accusation quickly escalated into an argument. Furious, Jack once again grabbed his whip. Sally was subjected to another brutal beating. As Janice watched, a complicated mixture of emotions filled her heart. Silently, she picked up a fork that had fallen onto the floor and placed it back on the table. Then she quietly walked away like a child who had done something wrong. Because Sally constantly appeared obedient and cooperative, her treatment gradually improved. She was no longer confined entirely to the basement. At times, she was even allowed outside to hang laundry, giving her brief moments to enjoy fresh air. Even so, Jack never loosened his control over her. He constantly searched for opportunities to reinforce his twisted beliefs. One day, he fabricated a story about a female servant who had escaped, only to have her entire family murdered afterward. The tale was meant as a warning. He didn't want Sally to make the same mistake. As the years passed, the unusual behavior inside Jack's household began attracting attention from neighbors. As a result, the couple was forced to move once again. During this period, Janice successfully gave birth to their child. Looking at the newborn baby, Sally felt a strange emotion rise inside her. For a brief moment, she almost felt as though she had become part of the family. But before she could fully embrace that feeling, Jack summoned her back to the basement. Without hesitation, she crawled into the wooden box she knew all too well. Jack shut the lid, then secured it tightly with screws. This was where she slept every single night. The following day, Jack headed into the forest to cut timber and earn money. Since Janice was busy caring for the baby, he had no choice but to bring Sally with him. Along the way, Jack deliberately fed her another lie. He pointed out 2 passing forest rangers and claimed they were actually members of the organization. He warned Sally not to speak to them under any circumstances, or she would create serious problems for herself. The warning left her anxious and uneasy. While Jack worked, Sally finally gathered the courage to ask the question she had been carrying for so long. When would she be allowed to go home? As always, Jack responded with another carefully crafted lie. He claimed that the organization's rules prohibited servants from returning home whenever they wished. However, he eventually agreed to let her write a letter to her family. For the first time in a long while, a genuine smile appeared on Sally's face. Not long afterward, Jack accidentally struck his own foot while cutting timber. For a brief moment, she realized this was the perfect chance to escape. But after only a second of hesitation, she instinctively rushed over to help him. Instead of running, she carefully wrapped his wound. She believed every lie Jack had ever told her. More than anything, she feared that escaping might somehow bring harm to her family. That evening, Janice returned home. She found Sally tending to Jack's injury. A surge of jealousy immediately rose inside her. Without a word, she stepped forward and personally took over the task of treating Jack's wound. Although Jack continued acting cold toward Sally on the surface, deep down, he had already developed a twisted emotional attachment to her. After this incident, he became even more convinced that Sally was loyal and trustworthy. His confidence in her only continued to grow. Before long, another 4 years passed. Sally drifted through life inside the house like a ghost. As she watched the child grow older year after year, a sense of confusion slowly filled her heart. How much of her life had disappeared within these walls? One day, Jack decided to take his wife and child on a vacation by the lake. Once again, Sally was left alone, locked inside the dark wooden box. Only a narrow ventilation pipe provided enough air for her to breathe. The summer heat became unbearable. The temperature inside the box climbed higher and higher. Sally suffered tremendously as exhaustion overtook her. She began hallucinating. In her mind, she was floating across a vast ocean. Water stretched endlessly in every direction. For the first time in years, she felt free. Then a powerful survival instinct surged through her, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. Sally drove her foot into the side of the box. To her astonishment, the wooden panel finally gave way. Several days later, Jack and his family returned from their vacation. The moment he saw that the wooden box had been damaged, he immediately began searching frantically for Sally. When he entered the bathroom, he found her sitting there with a vacant expression. Back in the house, Sally confessed that she had begun to believe everything that had happened to her was somehow meant to be. That was why she hadn't taken the opportunity to escape. After repairing the wooden box, Jack ordered Sally to climb back inside. The incident affected him deeply. After all, Sally had been given a chance to run, yet she had chosen to stay. A powerful impulse began growing inside him. He wanted Sally to officially become his wife, but Janice strongly opposed the idea. After countless arguments and endless persuasion, Jack finally managed to wear her down. Reluctantly, Janice agreed to his outrageous request. At last, Jack got what he wanted and forced Sally into a relationship with him. As time passed, Janice gradually seemed to accept Sally's presence. The two women even began reading the Bible together and sharing household chores. Meanwhile, Jack enjoyed the attention and care of both women. On the surface, their lives appeared peaceful, wrapped in a false sense of happiness. But one day, everything changed. When Jack came home and demanded that Sally prepare dinner, Janice unexpectedly stood up for her. All it took was a single comment. Jack exploded with rage. He locked Janice inside a room and brutally beat her. The horrifying scene terrified both Sally and the child. The fragile illusion of peace inside the household was shattered. Not long afterward, Jack discovered a note Sally had left beside his bed. In it, she wrote about how desperately she wanted to see her family again. Jack stared at her for a long moment. Then he spoke in a gentle voice. He claimed that the company had finally granted permission for her to visit her parents. The news left Sally overwhelmed with emotion. She could barely speak, but Jack attached one condition: to ensure that she would return, she first had to pass a trust test. The request left Sally completely confused. Jack handed her a shotgun and ordered her to place the barrel in her mouth. Despite her overwhelming fear, Years of captivity had conditioned her not to resist. With tears in her eyes, she pulled the trigger. Fortunately, the gun wasn't loaded. Jack was extremely pleased by her obedience. As a reward, he agreed to take her home to see her parents. The following day finally arrived. Sitting in the car, Sally could barely contain her excitement. She couldn't stop thinking about seeing her family again. Before long, the vehicle pulled up in front of her childhood home. Before letting her out, Jack issued one final warning. He told her not to even think about trying to escape. According to him, the company would stop at nothing to track her down. Worse still, they might target her family as well. The threat completely terrified Sally. She promised she would never reveal the truth. When Sally's parents and sister saw her standing there alive, they were overcome with emotion. For years, they had believed she was dead. Sally casually explained that she had spent the past several years working out of town. A short while later, Jack made an excuse and stepped away, leaving the family to enjoy their reunion. But Sally's sister couldn't shake her suspicions. Something felt wrong. Sally looked completely different from the person she once knew. Her appearance, her behavior, even the way she spoke seemed unusual. It was as though she was hiding a terrible secret. At dinner, her sister repeatedly asked what had happened during the missing years, but Sally refused to say anything. She still feared the fictional company Jack had invented, believing her family could be harmed. She chose to remain silent. The next day, Jack visited the family home himself. He introduced himself as Sally's boyfriend. Then he announced that he planned to take her away for a wedding trip. Sally's sister watched him carefully. Unlike her parents, she remained skeptical, but Sally's parents were simply overjoyed that their daughter had found someone she loved. They never questioned Jack's true identity. In fact, her mother was so happy that she even took a photograph of the couple embracing.
Okay, got it.
Then she watched as Jack drove away with Sally once again. Jack was convinced that Sally could no longer live without him. He even prepared a separate room specifically for her. Unfortunately, Janice overheard everything. For the first time, she fully realized that her husband's attention now belonged entirely to Sally. A mixture of anger, heartbreak, and resentment flooded her mind. At last, she made a decision. She would leave the house and take their daughter with her. Despite Jack's desperate attempts to stop her, Janice refused to change her mind. As he watched his wife and daughter drive away, Jack felt more miserable than ever before. With nowhere else to direct his anger, he turned it towards Sally. His violent nature resurfaced immediately. He viciously reminded her that she was still nothing more than his servant.
No? Huh? Come with me. Get in.
Then he locked her inside the basement. As if that weren't enough, he threw her into a dark underground cellar. Outside, the rain continued pouring down. Inside, water slowly rose around Sally's ankles. Shivering uncontrollably, she felt completely helpless. Fear consumed her. Then, at the very moment when all hope seemed lost, Janice returned. She came back for Sally. Without hesitation, she set her free. Together, they finally escaped the nightmare. For the first time, Janice revealed the truth. She told Sally that Jack had once murdered another young woman who had been kidnapped just like her. Only then did Janice fully accept that Jack's crimes were unforgivable. She could no longer stand by and do nothing. She was determined to help Sally escape once and for all. Janice drove her to the bus station. Even then, Sally still worried that the company might come after her family. That was when Janice revealed the final truth. The company never existed. It had all been a lie. Every threat, every warning, every story Jack had told her, none of it was real. Shocked beyond words, Sally finally understood the full extent of the manipulation she had endured. Without hesitation, she boarded a bus and left town behind. For the first time in years, she was free to reclaim her life. In the end, Jack was convicted for all of his crimes and sentenced to 104 years in prison. As for Janice, she bravely testified against her husband, helping expose everything he had done. And after enduring 2,640 days of captivity, Sally finally returned home, a place she had been separated from for far too many years.